Everyone good? Okay. Okay, can I go ahead and move forward? Good? Okay, good. So, as I mentioned, just a few minutes of slides here at the beginning, maybe 5-10 minutes of slides and demos, and then we'll go ahead and get started with the actual live sort of coding tutorial portion. So, first a little bit about Continuum. So my name is Bryan, by the way. I work for Continuum Analytics. We're one of the sponsors of PyData. Very happy to be here in Dallas for the first time. We've had lots of PyData conferences that we've helped to put on, in New York and Silicon Valley and London and Germany, and we're now happy to put one on a little bit closer to home. So Continuum's based here in Austin. We do work in a lot of different domains: finance, geophysics. We work for some DARPA. Interesting projects there, all kinds of stuff, and we try to create a lot of really interesting technology tools to put in the hands of data scientists, basically people who have domain expertise, subject matter expertise, people who are maybe occasional programmers, but they have this specialized knowledge, they just need to be able to get the work done. We're trying to bring tools to them to let them do more with less code. And so Bokeh is one of our open source projects, all BSD licensed, and so we'll talk about that today. Okay, so what is Bokeh? So Bokeh is a library for interactive visualization. We want to be able to have visualizations that we can sort of interrogate, that aren't just static, that we can play around with, either with tools on the plot or widgets, that sort of thing. Novel graphics as well. So there's a lot of interesting visualizations folks are doing, especially on the side of like data journalism, other areas as well. And so it's not just about bar charts or hopefully not pie charts. It's what kind of interesting data stories can we tell? And so can we generate sort of novel visualizations? Streaming data, large data, those are concerns that a lot of folks have, so we'll see some examples of that. And it's for the browser, right? So the idea is we want to be able to target the browser for these visualizations from a very high level in Python, or as we'll see, other languages actually as well. Have some matplotlib compatibility, right? Because we all have lots of matplotlib code laying around. I know that I certainly do, and so it's good to be able to have some layer of compatibility so that we can generate bokeh plots in the browser directly from a wide cross-section of matplotlib code. And the main thing, of course, is that we don't have to write any JavaScript, right? So that's, I have to write a lot of JavaScript, and I don't like it. It seems like a lot of people don't like writing JavaScript, and so we wrote all this JavaScript so you don't have to. So what is it? Well, as I mentioned, it's this library, and there's a lot of interest in this idea of visualizing in the browser. I was actually really pleased and surprised to see this morning as I was updating these slides that we just passed, I think, for the first time, 20K installs a month of Bokeh. So between Conda and pip sort of installs, you can see we've got now over 20K installs last month, which is crazy, incredible to me, but I love to see it. There's obviously a lot of people who've sort of favorited and starred us on GitHub, and we've got a really active mailing list, active to the point now that I actually can't sort of answer all the questions that are coming in, and get any other work done. And that's a great problem to have, right? I mean, but just definitely there's a lot of interest in this, and we're excited about moving forward on a lot of different features and things we still have to build out. Just something else that came from the mailing list the other day, I was really happy. Someone asked a question and I answered it, and this was their response. So I was like, my work here is done. If you don't have to use MATLib, my work here is done. So, we hope we can find a nice place for Bokeh to live in a variety of contexts, not just MATLab, but you can use Bokeh with R, you can use Bokeh with Scala and Lua, and so we'll see lots of examples of fun stuff. So I mentioned interactivity. Just a few words about those bullet points I had earlier, and then we'll see some demos and then get to the code. So what do I mean by interactivity? I mean things like dragging and zooming. I mean linked panning and linked brushing and linked selections. Maybe selections that can round trip to a server running process. If you make a selection on your plot, you want to be able to send that selection back to some other code that can do some further, use that selection to inform some further computation and then update the plot again. This full sort of duplex round trip capability I think is really important. Resizing the plot on the client. Things like hover tools that can allow you to drill down and see sort of level of detail into data that's maybe not displayed visually, but you can sort of see other columns of data in this hover tooltip, and of course widgets. And so you can see a lot of these examples in the gallery. Let me go ahead and navigate there right quick. Keep forgetting I'm running actually in Keynote, not in that. All right, so let's see. If we go to the main Bokeh docs site, And here, if I go to the gallery, you can actually see a lot of examples in the gallery. And this is sort of a good place to start anyway. You can get a good idea for the kind of graphics that you can put in the browser. So these are just thumbnails. We can click on individual ones of these and see, for instance, this reproduction. This is actually a reproduction of a New York Times chart, U.S. unemployment over most of the last century. And so you can see we have this nice hover tool that allows us to get down into details, right? So what's the actual rate? I can see what the color is, but maybe I want to see what the actual rate is. And so this hover tool allows us to access that data at a more granular level. Another example, this is a reproduction of a Mike Bostock chart that he did in R and ggplot, sort of Les Mis co-occurrences, right? So I can see what characters in Les Mis are together in conversations and what chapters in Les Mis. And again, we can have a nice hover tool that sort of drills down. But again, we also have these nice, like the resize tool that allows me to resize the plot directly in the browser. What other good things to show here? I'll show lots of demos. So anyway, this is a good idea to get what's there. You can sort of take a look at this gallery. And that's, again, on bokeh.pydata.org. That's the main doc site. Okay, going back to Keynote. Another thing about interactivity is widgets. We'll see some little examples here in a second, but the idea is maybe you want to have sliders, drop-downs, all kinds of widgets that allow you to manipulate the plot and to show different things. And so Bokeh supports having that both with the server, and actually some of the cutting-edge stuff I'll show is you can actually do a lot of this stuff now without the server. You can have that slider app now without having to run the Bokeh server. You can have a static HTML document that you could email to someone that has the capability to have these sort of sliders and updates. In fact, why don't we go ahead and see about some of those now. Too many tabs open. Let's see what we've got here. Well, actually, this is interesting. So this is something someone just sent us. I think this page has gone stale, but this was happy to see this. This is, I think, survival curves or something for different teams, depending on what the score is at a certain period of time. And so this is a nice deployed Bokeh plot, and you can play around with the sliders. My conference Wi-Fi has gone a little bit goofy, so it's not updating, but let's see. Oh, here we go. So this is another example of widgets. And so this is a static document, right? We can have lots of examples that use the Bokeh server, which is an interesting place where things like downsampling or further computations can happen, more complicated computations. But you can certainly have things in a static document. I could just email this HTML file to someone, and they would have all this interactivity, all the panning and zooming and being able to resize the plot. All of that's really contained within the document itself, right, in the client document. So trying to expose as much as we can on the client side without the server. But the server, again, is a really exciting part of Bokeh and also open source as well, BSD license. Okay. A few more examples just, again, to get us motivated. Example here, this link selections, right? So you can make a selection. This is what I was saying with the server. You can make a selection on here, and that selection can then inform some further computation. So it actually goes to the server, computes the histogram of just the selected points, and then updates the plot based on that. So you can see both the histograms of the selected points and the sort of the light gray one is the histogram of the unselected points. So these are the kind of visualizations we want to allow people to create very easily at a high level from Python and then be able to publish or put on the web. Data tables as well. So we have the ability to add sort of linked data tables. You can see that if there are points that are selected in the table, that the selections are reflected into the points of the plot. And again, we can combine this with things like hover tooltips to have very sophisticated interactions and drill down capability. Mentioned novel graphics just to sort of show a few things like that. The central idea behind Bokeh is really somewhat inspired by Leland Wilkinson's grammar of graphics. We're definitely not implementing a pure ggplot, grammar of graphics system, but I'm inspired by that idea, this idea of sort of tight abstractions that you can put together very cleanly, and in particular the idea of having all the visual attributes of a glyph, some visual marker or visual presence, be sort of vectorizable over your data. And so you can attach vectors of data to the coordinates or to the sizes or the colors or whatever attributes you really want to. And so that's reflected in our interfaces as well. And you can see that here. The periodic table there at the bottom, that's actually really a scatter plot. It's a scatter plot of squares and text, and that's sort of reflected in the API. But you can have this nice interactive plot that is very simple to spell. Another thing we mentioned, there's a Seaborn plot up there on the left. We do have some compatibility with matplotlib, and so that affords us actually automatically compatibility with a lot of Seaborn plots or ggplot.py plots. That one on the right is kind of interesting. It's this reproduction of this visualization by a guy named Burton, I think about 40, 50 years ago. I've never seen it before. It's an interesting demonstration. Someone did it in R, so I wanted to make sure that we could show that we could do that sort of thing in Python as well. But it's plot that shows the efficacy of different antibiotics against different strains of bacteria. And it's interesting, in order to show the strongest antibiotics, they have an inverted radial axis, and that's the part I've never seen before. Obviously, the better an antibiotic is, the smaller its minimum inhibitory dose is, and so to make those smaller numbers stick out further, the chart has a inverted radial axis, which I thought was kind of weird. I'm not sure I would do that if I were designing that chart, but it's interesting that you can certainly reproduce and create charts of that complexity. We do have some capability to have GIS type plots. That's hopefully a lot more capability in that direction is coming later on this year. Streaming and dynamic data as well. Again, one of the aspects of the Bokeh architecture is if you have data on the server and the data updates, then the plot automatically responds. And so it's one way to have sort of streaming data. But you can also have streaming data really, without necessarily involving the server. This example, if I go ahead and find it, is a live spectrogram, right? So there's a microphone on my computer here. It's reading in data at some sample rate. It's doing an FFT, and so you can see sort of a waterfall plot of the FFT. We convert the signal, which was down here at the bottom. Here's the signal. It's computing then a power spectrum of that. So let me go ahead and get a nice tone generator. So my boss, Peter Wang, embarrassed me at a different PyData, asking me to whistle. I actually have never been able to whistle. So let me go ahead and get my faithful tone generator that I now always carry with me. And we can see, for instance, that, sure enough, there's our spike in our power spectrum, and we can see that up here if I scroll as well. Of course, we can sort of see that go up and down, coming out of my hearing range, but back down. Anyway, so that's, this sort of thing is the thing you can do with Bokeh fairly easily. Most of this is written in Python. This one does have a little bit of JavaScript just to glue together an AJAX sort of call to get the sound data. But you'll soon be able to spell this in pure Python, I would say, in the next release or two. And so that's very exciting. I mean, there's a really minimal amount of JavaScript to get this one running. Okay. I think that's just about it for my slides. Let's see if there's maybe a couple more. Again, server-based. Oh, it all works in the IPython notebook, of course. A lot of folks here, I'm sure, are familiar with the IPython notebook. If you're not, it's kind of a Mathematica-style computable document format. Is what the Wolfram people call their thing. But it's the idea is you can have cells of code interspersed with expository text that explains it, interspersed with the output, interspersed with links to videos or YouTubes or sound files or whatever. So it's really sort of a presentation platform for sort of reproducible analytics and science. And so all of this works fine just in the IPython notebook, including the server stuff as well. And again, the last thing, there's no JavaScript, right? So I mean, just to give you some idea. I need to update these slides. This is a little bit out of date. But roughly the same, roughly the same amount of code. You can see to get this map of Texas unemployment is, basically, 3 lines of code, 1 real line of code. This little histogram down here, we've created sort of at a lower level API with 4 lines of code. There's actually now a Bokeh.charts interface that allows you to get things like histograms and higher level sort of schematic charts with basically, one-liners. So we have a very layered approach to our API in Bokeh. We have a very low level models interface that's basically mirrors the JavaScript client library object graph. And then we have a sort of a plotting MATLAB level kind of interface that has these glyphs that you can vectorize. And then now we're fleshing out and continuing to work on a very high level charts interface, which is sort of intended for high level statistical charts. It might involve doing aggregations or statistical computations for you, but you can get these charts in sort of one line. So that's where we're headed. Another example. Okay. Anyway, so we'll get to the actual tutorial part, the code here. Just to mention, though, if you're interested in this either now or after the talk or next week, we're definitely looking for more people to contribute. As the interest in Bokeh grows, it's getting really hard to keep up with bug reports and feature requests and community involvement. And I would love to help anyone that is interested in engaging with Bokeh. Come help join our team. So it'd be great. Okay. So let me go ahead and close that off. So hopefully everyone is, and let me close some of these tabs as well. Actually, a few more demos right quick. Just to mention, I did say everything works in the IPython notebook. So here's an example, for instance, in the IPython notebook. This actually uses the IPython notebook widgets. They're called interactors. And so this is, me twiddling these interactors here and seeing the plot update. So all of that works fine in the IPython notebook. Another really interesting example is this one here. This actually combines Bokeh with Numba. Numba is another one of the open source libraries that's really been put forth by Continuum. It's basically a compiler for Python, a subset of Python, and it allows you to have sort of just-in-time compiling of certain kinds of Python code and make them really efficient. So this is actually an image blur kernel applied to this image, and I can slide this in real time, and you should be able to see the image blurring there as I move this slider in the IPython notebook, right? So Numba and Bokeh together, pretty exciting and powerful combination. Again, both open source. I did mention that you can use Bokeh with other languages, and I think it's worth just pointing out, one of our collaborators actually wrote some really great R bindings for Bokeh. So this is actually Bokeh plots generated from R code. So if you're familiar with R and you want to create Bokeh plots that have all the standard pan and zoom tools that we saw in the other examples that we'll see later, but you want to do it from R code, that's perfectly fine. So we're a big Python shop at Continuum, and so we have invested heavily in Python bindings for Bokeh, but certainly possible to drive Bokeh charts from R. Facebook actually created some simple Lua bindings for their iTorch machine learning projects. One of our devs is a big Scala guy, so there's Scala bindings. Some folks have approached us about Ruby and D bindings. So Bokeh makes it really easy to write bindings for itself in lots of different languages. And so again, feel free to use your language of choice. Oh yeah, here's that periodic table. Also has a nice hover tool. Again, we can drill down and see lots of details about the periodic table, but that's generated now from R code. And it's a little bit, but not too much. What else? Scatter plot. Yeah. So if you're familiar, I'm not too familiar with R, so it's hard for me to parse some of what's going on. But if you are and you want to use R, all of this stuff is here. Okay. Excuse me. All right. Some other examples, just showing again tooltips with like lines and whatnot. Anyway, good stuff. So, oh yeah, a few more examples. I do want to motivate things, although this may be too wide to show up on this screen. This example here is a little bit of a cross filter, so it has this auto MPG data. The idea is that it's actually not wide enough to. There we go. Maybe I want to be able to do some filtering, right? So I can drop this miles per gallon chart down. Now I can filter by miles per gallon, or maybe I want to do some faceting, so I can facet this plot by the number of cylinders. I don't even have to facet by continuous ones. Maybe I want to facet by this continuous displacement column, and now it actually bins things for us automatically. So these are the kind of tools we want to let people create very simply with Bokeh, and this one's built into Bokeh, but you can certainly build tools like that as well. Here's another example of sort of an app that uses the server where we have this stock correlations, and you can sort of see the selection here is linked right to the selection up above. The histograms update, the data table updates as well, so that sort of thing. Anyway, lots of fun stuff. So now we can go ahead and dive into the tutorial. So let me go ahead and load up that page. So again, this is on the PyData.org side. It's en/pydfw/docs/tutorial.html. I'll give everyone a second to navigate to that page, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Confession to make before we get started is that, as I mentioned, I've sort of been working on this right up to the deadline. I know that no one's ever done that before I talk. I set out to write a new tutorial for Bokeh. It seems I've actually written a user's guide, which is great. We're going to go through lots of examples, and we're going to use this materials. But just so you know, that these starts very simple, and the plots are fairly straightforward. We'll try to maybe do some more interesting things as we go along. But again, I encourage everyone here, if you have Bokeh installed, to play around with the examples, to try this code out, to follow along with me. I'll talk a bit about each one of the sections that we go through, but then I will also pause and give everyone a minute or 2 minutes to play around and ask any questions that are going on as well. Also, of course, if you have any problems, please let me know. So. All right, so before we get started, there is this getting set up section. It'll let you sort of test, that you've got a working installation. Again, conda install Bokeh, pip install Bokeh should get you going. Just a quick check, if you import Bokeh, you should be able to check that, Bokeh.version, the current latest release is 0.8.2. We will have a 0.9 release in about 3 weeks or so. Again, if you follow the instructions for getting one of those dev builds, you'll see a funkier sort of version number. But if you want help doing that, let me know. A little more sophisticated test is you can run this code either in the IPython notebook, although if you do, change output file to output notebook, or you can run it in the Python interpreter, and you should get a plot show up. So give everyone maybe just a second to do this, but you should see a plot something like this. Or in the notebook, if you change it to output notebook, you should see it like this. So I'll go ahead and leave that up. Give everyone just a minute. Anyone that is having problems, please let me know, and we'll try to get you sorted out. Otherwise, we'll go pretty full steam ahead. Yes? I'm sorry? GitHub? Yeah, Bokeh is on GitHub. So if you go to... Oh, I see. Yeah, so this is the deployed doc site. The docs are in GitHub on a branch. So it's a PR. I haven't merged yet. So again, like I said, as I confessed, this tutorial is probably actually going to end up being our new user guide because it's really at that level of detail. It's, Bokeh has grown quite large. It's kind of hard to write a comprehensive, from nothing to everything tutorial. And so I think we're going to have a few more targeted tutorials, and this will be a great user's guide once we flesh it out even a little bit more. It's already better than our current user's guide, though. So, but yeah, this is on a branch on a PR on GitHub. The REST source. So this is all generated from Sphinx, and this will go on our main site, which is bokeh.pydata.org, right? But this is just, I've deployed this special version for you guys, so you get to test drive these materials for me. But yeah, it's all on GitHub. Okay. Anyone trying to run these examples having any problems running these examples? Yes. Okay. So it's not importing Bokeh. It's possible that you're running an IPython notebook, like maybe you have virtual env or different conda environments, or you have conda installed and it's running IPython from a different place that doesn't have Bokeh installed. We can come maybe take a look. I'm trying to see if any of my colleagues are here that could help out with that. But if not, I can come take a look and help you out during the first sort of longer exercise break we take. Any other questions or issues folks are having? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and see some examples. We're going to start very simple and try to work our way up to some other more sophisticated examples as we get going. Okay. Excuse me. So as I mentioned, we do have a very layered sort of approach to our interfaces in Bokeh. We have this notion of a very low-level interface we're not going to talk about today. It's bokeh.models. It's basically a serialization layer. It's the most flexible layer. You can put together arbitrary combinations of these objects, and then it's the most flexible, but obviously the most tedious and most sort of error-prone to put together. So we have some higher-level interfaces that allow you to spell still things very flexibly, but also do a lot of the work for you, right? So this Bokeh plotting interface is the next one we're going to talk about. So it does a lot of the work of I want to plot, so I don't want to have to create the axes by hand and the grids by hand. I don't want to have to sort of assemble all these things by hand. I'm going to get a basic plot that can have axes and grids, and I can sort of throw glyphs at it. So the idea behind Bokeh.plotting interface is that we get a basic plot, and we can add glyphs sort of vectorized over our data to that. And so first thing we might want to do is maybe just do a simple scatter plot. So let's see if we can see how that might be accomplished in Bokeh. So let's see if this is this text. It's pretty small, but you guys should have hopefully a copy in front of you of the docs. But let's take a look at this code. We won't go in maybe quite this much detail over every example, but let me talk fairly detailed about this, and then we can see the output. So again, we import from Bokeh.plotting. We have a couple of really important functions there. We have figure, which is going to allow us to get a new plot, essentially. Output file, which is going to let us output the results of this to an HTML file. If you're wanting to try this in the notebook, you're going to want to use output notebook instead of output. I mean, output file will work, but if you want to see it directly inside the notebook, you're going to want to use output notebook. And then show, which is a command that actually says we want to realize the plot and get out the output either in the notebook or in a file. So the first thing we do is say output file. We want it to go to this line.html file. Again, if you're in the notebook, you're going to say output notebook without any arguments. And then we want to create a plot, right? So we say p equals figure, and we might want to set things like the plot width and the plot height, which we can do here with plot width equals 400 and plot height equals 400. I don't really want to have a title, so I can say title equals none. That gets us our basic empty plot. What can we do with that? And again, with this Bokeh.plotting interface, the idea is we want to be able to add glyphs to it, these visual markers that are attached to our data. And so the simplest thing we might want to do is simply scatter some circles. So here we have p.circle, and I give it a list of numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and some other numbers. For the y-coordinates, I give it a size. The size here is in pixels. I can give it a color, navy, an alpha transparency, half transparent, and then I say to show it. Excuse me. And we see there's the output plot. So let me go ahead and get a new notebook up, and we can actually try running some of this stuff in the notebook. Gallery. That's where I'm going to run through things in the gallery, in the notebook. So again, we start from Bokeh.plotting, import show and output notebook and figure, right? And so that'll take a second. I'm running off master, so it's giving me a little warning about my CDN version not matching, but it's fine. Don't worry about me. And then we want to say output notebook. no arguments. And hopefully what we'll see is a little indication that things have loaded successfully, right? So Bokeh actually has to load its JavaScript library into, the notebook, the running notebook. And so this is an indication that that's worked. So hopefully everything should be working well. So you guys should see that as well. And then again, I say something like P equals figure. I don't want a title. Title equals none. And that gives me this plot object. And then I can say something like P.circle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it gives me this, tells me I've done something, but I actually want to show this object. We're probably going to add an auto show mode here pretty soon, so that if you create a plot like that, it just automatically shows. But right now, I have to call the show, and it shows up. Now, I can affect the visual attributes of this circle, right, by passing in more parameters to the circle function. You can see in our reference guide has a list of all the attributes, and we'll talk some about styling later too. But just to give you an idea, again, some of the things like color. Well, let's be explicit. Let's give it a radius equals 0.3. And so when I do radius, that's actually going to be in data space coordinates, right? So size is in pixels. For markers, size is always in pixels. But this radius for circles in particular allows us to get sort of a data space. And you can see that these all have a radius of 0.3. But I can change things like the color. It's red. And let me go ahead and put the show P here. And we can see that updates, and that's great. But we can also individually control things like the fill color being red without changing the outside, line width. We can have a line width, right? So for the drawn line part of it. So line width equals 4, right? And now we can see the sort of that perimeter of the circle has gotten a bit wider. We can do things like set the alpha. So there's lots of ways to style this. We'll talk a bit more about styling these charts a little bit later. But this just to give you sort of an indication of that. So hopefully everyone can sort of run through the basic example that's in the docs, that tutorial.html, and then play around with it, right? So let me give you guys just a minute or two to play around with this. If anyone's having any trouble seeing it either in the notebook or running it in just a script to get a file out, let me know, and I'll take a look. Again, I think I've lost all my colleagues. So no one else is here to help. But yeah, okay, I'll come back there in a second. Yeah, question? Where are you trying to use glyphs? Yep. Okay. So which one are you running into error on? This line? And what version of Bokeh do you have installed? Yeah, here, let me come take a look. So you guys work for a little bit. I'm going to come wander around. There are a few folks, I think, with questions, so we'll take just a minute. You guys can play around with this example, maybe even move on to the next one, and we'll get started back again in just a second. Okay, well, I think it seems like a lot of folks have things up and running. If you don't, next exercise, we'll just keep coming out and helping you guys get set up. But let's go ahead and move on and talk about some of the next sections. Right, so that obviously showed how to scatter a square. And again, this comes back to the idea of attaching sort of data to visual attributes, right? So implicitly, there's an X and a Y coordinate for any marker, and so I've attached this sort of data, and that's not too revolutionary. I guess any scatter plot's going to have data for your X and Y markers, but really we could do the same sort of thing and have a list for colors or for the line widths or for the sizes, all sorts of things like that. We'll see some examples here in a bit. Just to mention, there's lots of other kind of markers besides circle. There's squares. If I just change circle to square in that code, I get a nice squares here. I can go back to my IPython notebook, and I can change this to square. And let's give it a size equals 20, because squares don't have radiuses. And we see that there. Right? Let's get a new figure, actually. So now we can see that we've got this nice, let's make that even bigger. 40. Sorry. Missing comma, size equals 40. There we go. So there's our nice square, but we have things like square, X gives us a nice X in the square, or triangles as well. Let's do. We can give things like angles, right? What if we want to put these at some sort of angle? 0.2. And, this is what I mentioned, we can have, I keep adding them to the same, the same figure. we can have a list of angles. Like we can either have a single angle that affects all the glyphs, or we can have a vector of angles, really, right? All of these different properties of the glyph, in this case a triangle, are vectorizable. And so now you can see, and actually it's nice to have them both up there. We can compare that the angles are different, right? So let me go ahead and get a fresh plot though. So yeah, so all of these things are vectorizable. Things like colors, things like line styles, text styles, fill styles. All of these properties of the different glyphs are vectorizable. All of the different data attributes are vectorizable as well. Okay. So markers, that's great. There's a lot of markers you can see here in the tutorial/user guide. Here's actually links to all the different marker types we have. We have things like asterisks and arcs and crosses, diamonds, squares, all of those sorts of things. So markers are something that's pretty common to want to write. Lines, of course, something else, fairly straightforward, the bokeh.plotting level of the interface, right? So again, I create a figure, I give it maybe a plot width and a height in this case, and then I have some data, and I can say, give me a line for those data points. Really fairly straightforward. I get a line there. By default, all these plots come with nice tools, panning and zooming tools. I don't have to do anything to get those. We'll see a little bit later how you can customize the tools and make them add or subtract tools or make them more sophisticated, but there's a pretty good set of basic standard tools that come with any plot without requiring any extra effort for you, including things like the resize, sort of a PNG, preview save, a reset tool, all of that sort of thing. So we can try this again up in the notebook. Right, so now if I go up here, I'm actually going to put P equals figure here so that I get a new figure every time. And I'm just going to change this to line, right? We don't need size or angle. Fill color, right? None of that affects lines, right? So another thing is that a lot of these things are typed really well, right? So lines don't have things like a size. Lines don't have angles. So if I do line, it's not going to actually sort of complain there. I thought it would actually, but anyway. But let's go ahead and give it a line width equals 4. Let's change that to line width equals 8. We'll make a really thick line. We'll go ahead and change this to something a little bit different, so we can see. So again, we can draw the lines we need to. Obviously, this is a very simple case. Typically, you're going to have, I imagine, hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of points. Again, the nice thing about Bokeh is it can scale even higher than that. We actually have someone currently engaged to work on a WebGL backend for Bokeh. So Bokeh currently uses HTML Canvas. There's a library built on top of it. But we're working on someone to add WebGL capability to push us even further into sort of, the hundreds of thousands of points range. And then really the Bokeh server pushes even beyond that with the idea that if you want to be able to have large data sets that have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of points, you're obviously never going to ship that to the browser. But you could use the Bokeh server to do downsampling or intelligent decimation or other techniques that we're sort of working on to be able to present more meaningful views of that data to the user. Anyway, like I said, this certainly works for a few cases. So there we go. Simple lines, fairly straightforward. Patch is very similar. So if you need to draw sort of a polygonal patch area, it's very very similar to that as well. So here I can just do patch, and again, I can just give it basically the same. In this case, I'm just going to change line to patch, and I'll get a nice path to patch, and we'll get a patch, right? Drawn out of that. So you can draw sort of whatever you need. So there's actually versions of these that take not just arrays of points and connect a single patch or a single line. There's actually a multi-line and a patches glyph that allow you to draw multiple lines at once from a vector of data, or multiple patches at once from a vector of X and Y points, for instance. So let me give everyone a chance to play around with some of these examples that we just did, and make sure everyone's up and running, and then we'll keep moving on, pressing forward. Okay, question. Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the question is about finding real live business use cases. So, the thing is, I hear from people at conferences, and I love to hear it. I sit at the table and people come by and I'm like, I work on Bokeh, and like, oh, I love Bokeh. I use it on this internal thing that I can't show anybody. And so that's what we found to be the case is a lot of people seem to be using Bokeh for internal dashboards, sort of BI type reporting. And so they just not necessarily the thing they can sort of share with us. I would say that anytime you have a desire to put sort of interactive plots on the web, and you want to be able to let people do it from a high level as opposed to having to write JavaScript, if you think that's a savings for you, that's where you can get your savings. Is if your data scientists are already working in R or Python, and you want them to be able to create rich interactive visualizations, they can do it directly from R or Python, right, using Bokeh. So that I think is the use case. I hope to see a lot more in the future. We certainly have people come and express interest to us and engage in consulting. Hopefully we're the Bokeh experts and we can provide that service. So we have folks that do want to use it on some of their internal things, and I certainly hope to see more outward-facing examples as well. There was a PyCon talk just a few weeks ago. Sarah Bird gave a really great talk at PyCon. She showed off a visualization that she created for the place that she works, showing some health data in and around Africa. There's a nice interactive slider. And so that was a really great visualization. We're actually going to engage with her. She's so good at this that we're going to have her come and make some really good examples, sort of data story type examples like that for us. And so we'll hope to have some more compelling examples like that. I'm sorry? No, that's to be in the near future, rather. We're going to have her, do that for us. But, this is sort of a tutorial, so we're starting very, very simple and just doing sort of the very basics. But, yeah, hopefully that gets towards answering the question. Yeah, other questions?
So, have you noticed the differences in different browsers? I was just testing Bokeh and Chrome, and I can't change the block.
Okay. Perhaps. I mean, so once you get into the point of supporting a lot of different browsers, that gets really difficult. We have a continuous integration suite that we run that generates sort of static images that we do diffs on. We're still in the process of standing up like a full Selenium thing that allows us to test across a lot more browsers with every commit. That's a big task, and it's ongoing. We do quite a bit of testing before our releases on recent versions of Internet Explorer, Safari, Chrome, on Windows, Linux, or a couple of flavors of Linux, and OS X. But inevitably, I'm sure there are versions that slip through. There's been a recent report of some problems on a Firefox version, and updating fixed it. So I'm like, well, unless we'll have to go see what the market penetration of this older version of Firefox is, because it may be that we just don't go back and fix it for that older version. But if you have a specific problem, I'd love to see it later, or maybe file a GitHub issue, because it's definitely a possibility. There are a lot of differences between browsers, and managing that it can be a bit of a task. All right, so has everyone had a chance to run through some of the next examples, the ones with the lines and patches and some more markers? Any other questions or problems? Okay. In that case, we will keep moving forward. Images, also possible to do images. So one thing about all these examples is I've tried to keep them very simple and not really involve NumPy or Pandas as a dependency. Occasionally, though, that it really is sort of unavoidable. So just so you know, this next example does use NumPy to easily create the RGBA data for displaying, right? So we can use the image glyph in Bokeh to display an image. And so here I've just constructed this image of RGBA data, a square matrix of data, and I filled in the red, green, blue, and alpha values by hand. There's also another image glyph that allows you to give basically a NumPy array of just scalar data and a color map, and then the color mapping actually happens on the browser. I don't have an example of that up in these docs, but if you do go to the standard Bokeh gallery, you can see an example of that right here. Right. So this plot here, I'm not actually sending the direct RGBA data. I'm constructing just the numbers. I'm calling sine times cosine and sending just those numerical scalar values to the client, and the client is color mapping it in the browser using this Spectral 11. And so there's a couple of different ways to show images, but the one I've got here in the tutorial so far is the actual image RGBA glyph. It allows you to really specify the RGBA yourself. So if you're constructing or color mapping on your, on the side where you're actually manipulating the data, that's how you can send those RGBA values over. So I'll let you guys can play with that as well. Although first, let me show one more thing, which I accidentally showed earlier, which is that, of course, you can combine multiple glyphs on one plot, right? So here, if I want to combine lines and circles and sort of have a line with little markers on it, that's really easy. I just call multiple glyph methods on that plot, right? So here I get p equals figure. I get my plot. I can say p.line, then I can say p.circle. And sure enough, now I have a line that has the circles at the same point. And so all that works just fine. We can add however many glyphs we want, whatever data they all need, and that's fine. So let me give you guys just another minute or two to play around with that, and then we'll move on and see some other things about different axes types. Yeah, we'll take questions while we're working. Yeah, question. Okay, that's interesting. I saw someone else have that today. I'm going to have to get to the bottom of that. Let me come see. So I think what we did is simply clear all the output in the notebook and then restart the kernel, and that was enough. Let me know if that doesn't do it for you. What I think is going on there is perhaps there was an older version of Bokeh. If are you running Anaconda? It's possible there was an older version of Bokeh, and maybe something is left over, some cruft from that is left over somehow, because, I haven't seen that. But anyway, okay, yeah, question. Okay. Can you try zooming out? me go ahead and copy it, make sure I haven't. So the nice thing is, another thing to mention, actually, all these plots that are live in the docs are actually generated by a Bokeh plot Sphinx directive. So if you have Sphinx documentation and you want to have live interactive plots in them, it's actually quite simple. If you look at the source code, let me show the source code for this page, right? If you know Sphinx, you know, Bokeh plot and the actual code for the plot's right there, or you can load it from a file. So if you have the need to put charts in your documentation for whatever reason, the Bokeh plot directive that we've recently created is quite nice for that. So anyway. Yeah, I wrote a plugin. Amusingly enough, the documentation for DocuTools is not quite what you might want it to be. So I had to spend quite a lot of time trawling through the Sphinx and DocuTools source code, but after a while, the internal logic of it finally dawned on me, and so I was able to write a few different directives and plugins, and so this is a plugin that I wrote to be able to put plots in Sphinx. So it's in the Bokeh repository. It's in bokeh.sphinx.ext, I think. And so if you have Bokeh, you have this plugin, and you're welcome. You can certainly use it in your own Sphinx docs. Okay. But there was a question back here. Let me come take a look on this image question, and then we'll move on to different axes types. Another place you guys can try out the code. So again, I've been editing this a little bit right beforehand. I did take out a from future import division. I wonder if that might have some bearing. If you go to the actual Bokeh gallery, that example is also listed here, and you can try copying this code exactly, which does have that from future import division. Because what looks like happening is if the division's not happening correctly on Python 2, or as you expect on Python 2, then the red and you would see that the most strong channel there would be green, right, with some other ones looking 0. So that might be the problem. I'm not sure. My apologies for late materials, but yes. No, they're actually located in Bokeh.io. So we may eventually deprecate the convenience imports from charts and plotting. For now, they're there sort of as a convenience, but there's one mechanism for showing charts. It's actually in the Bokeh.io module if you're really curious. But okay, I'll come take a look at the next extras, yeah. It should be, if you're not importing it from charts, it may be that it may not exist in the previous release, right? That's a fairly new change. So if nothing else, you can just import it from Bokeh.plotting and it'll work, so yeah. Okay. Okay, cool. All right, so axis types. So let's go ahead and move on and talk about some different kind of axes. So the standard plots, if you just create a figure, gives you sort of a linear axis, linear scale axis. It has the ability to pick sort of nice numbers along different scales, right? Basically multiples of 2, 5, and 10. Sort of the Heckbert nice number algorithm it uses. But sometimes you need different kinds of axes. Like maybe you just display your data on a log scale because it's very large, or maybe you're trying to explore some power law, so you want a log scale. Maybe you have a time series. You want to have a nice date-time axis that can actually pick nice numbers on a date-time axis and format them correctly on different scales. Or maybe you have categorical data. And so we can handle all of those different cases. First thing here is categorical axes. Bokeh handles this one fairly automatically, right? So if you have a list of factors here, in this case, this list of strings, A through H are my factors. And if I supply that as a range, excuse me, a range to my figure, y underscore range equals factors, then Bokeh will automatically create a categorical axis along that y dimension. And so we can take a look at the results here and see that sure enough, on the y-axis there, we have categorical, right, labels as opposed to something else. So that's fairly straightforward. Works basically again automatically. You don't have to do any extra work. You just have to provide the list of factors as as your range, and that will be used as the categorical range for that axis. Date-time axis, very easy to specify. If you have date-time data, which is really just like a pandas date-time column will work, or NumPy date-time column will work. It's basically seconds since epoch. If you have the time series with one of those date-time data, you can request the date-time axis by giving the axis type parameter. So here I say x-axis type equals date-time there in my call to figure. And so now I get a nice date-time axis that, again, scales nicely. And as I zoom in, I get the months, and then I get the days. And it's a much nicer sort of axis than, seeing the number of seconds obviously wouldn't be very useful, since 1970. So this gives you a much better sort of date-time aware axis. So again, it's very easy to specify date-time axis. You just say x-axis equals date-time, or y-axis equals date-time if you wanted one on the y-axis. Do be aware this one example does use pandas as well, just to be able to easily read data from the network, from the Yahoo Finance API, right, to get sort of realistic time series data. It goes out and it gets the I guess Apple series from Yahoo Finance, and so that's what's actually plotted here down below. Last thing here would be log scale axes. So sometimes, again, maybe you have one dimension, your data might be growing exponentially and you want to try to sort of get a handle on viewing it better. Or maybe you're, again, looking at some power law and you want to try to see that linear relationship show up on a log scale. It's very easy. Again, you say y-axis type, and now instead of date time, you can say y-axis type equals log. And sure enough, now we get this exponential function showing up as a nice straight line on our log scale axis, right? So that works out very well as well. So let's go ahead and give you guys a few minutes to play around with some of these different axis type examples. I know there's some folks here having some issues. Again, part of that, again, is my fault. I'm working on these docs based on basically the newest version of Bokeh, because this is what's going to go in the 0.9 release. So it's possible the last release of Bokeh simply has a couple of minor incompatibilities with what I've got. And we'll work through those. So you guys play around with this, and then I will come take a look at any questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand, come grab my attention. Okay. Okay. Well, let's go ahead and press forward. Definitely seem to be some sort of version incompatibilities. Again, I apologize for having sort of maybe some versions of things that are a little bit out of sync with the last dev version. That's on me. So, but we'll press forward. I'm going to skip very quickly over this next section, this using high-level charts. You guys can take a look at it. So I think we're a little bit over half time already. Again, I mentioned we have a sort of a layered API, and we want to be able to have a very flexible low-level interface, this nice mid-level interface that's still quite flexible, but a lot less work to put things together. And then we want to be able to have a very high-level interface for sort of schematic statistical charting. And so this is, I will say about this interface, it has been a little bit of a work in progress, right? We've been experimenting with different sort of spellings and the ways to implement things. We're converged, I think, on what we're finally sort of happy and satisfied with, and so we're going to go sort of crazy and start developing a whole wide variety of charts. We sort of haven't developed too many chart types until we're satisfied, and we're pretty much there now. We still have quite a few that are useful, and so I'll just show some of those right quick. Oh, look, it's not rendered. That's great. Well, maybe I won't show that. I'll redeploy these docs. I'm not sure why. So when I ran Sphinx locally, those built. So strike 2 for 2. Suppose I can actually. Love live demos. Well, I'll let that rebuild, actually. We'll see. It doesn't take too long to build our docs. And we'll see if that shows up. In the meantime, let me go ahead and get the other version and go back to our styling, because styling is important regardless of what interface you're looking at. So, okay. So it's almost done. Probably should have done a make clean there. It'll take a little bit longer. There we go. So let's see if this shows up on my locally deployed docs. It doesn't. Okay, so there was a last-minute change that broke that. There were a few people pushing on that, and one of us, probably me, broke that. So I'll redeploy that later with the working charts in line. You can see the code, though. I can still talk about the code. Here, if we want a nice line chart, it's fairly similar to the line glyph, but really where things change are things like bar charts, where you can say, I want my categories to this, and you can get group bars or stacked bars very easily. Box plots, right? In fact, we can just go to the main Bokeh gallery and see those. If we go down here at the bottom, you can see, for instance, stacked bars, right? So here's a stacked bar chart. Some Olympic medals, and we can see that we just call the bar with the medals and the countries, and that works. Step chart, if we want that. Here we've got a histogram, right? So here we've got some merged histograms that are together, and that's again basically just a one-liner. This is just showing there's a lot of different ways to pass data, sort of flexible ways to pass data to histogram, but really it's just histogram of my data frame or whatever the data input is, and the number of bins that I want, and we get the nice output there with the legend. Time series as well, or this is a lines rather, time series, right? So we can get, We can read in, again, Yahoo Finance to read in some time series data. We can pass that into the time series chart, and then all of a sudden we get a nice time series, and we can say legend equals true, and we get a nice legend, and all of that works out really nicely. So again, the idea behind the charts interface is to be able to do things at a very high level, in particular things like box plots or histograms that might involve statistical transformations. That's included in sort of the chart definition. And so if that's what you want at a very high level, that's what you can get. Okay. Sorry for the technical snafus there. All right, but let's go ahead and move on to styling and visual attributes, right? So we obviously want to be able to change lots of things about the appearance of our plots. We can take a look at that. So the first thing to note is that colors show up in a lot of different places around Bokeh. Obviously, you might have fill colors and line colors, text colors, all sorts of things. So there's a variety of different ways to supply colors to Bokeh. Any of the 147 CSS colors are fine as names. You can also give, hex RGBA values as strings. You can give 3 tuples or 4 tuples of RGB or RGBA data as well. And then in broad terms, there's 3 categories of properties that show up over and over again that are really good to know about. The first is line properties. Anytime you need to be able to configure what a line looks like, either because it's an outline on some glyph, or maybe it's the outline of the plot itself, or the grid lines, or the axis lines, or the axis ticks. Those are described by line properties. And that comprises things like line color and line width and line alpha. That's probably the 3 most important ones. If you really want to get down into it, you actually can control things like the mitering and the line cap and dashing. Maybe that one's pretty useful as well. But the next step is fill properties. Anytime you have an area that needs to be filled on the canvas, you can set both the color and the alpha of that fill. And then text, you can set, of course, things like font size, font style, color, baseline and alignments, that sort of thing. So all of those are available. So we can see how we can use those to actually update our plot. Although first, actually, we're going to see how to set ranges, right? So one thing we might need to do as well is to set the range explicitly. By default, Bokeh tries to auto-range for whatever data you give it, right? It has this thing called the data range, and it says, okay, I'm going to look over the data that you've given me, and I'm going to try to size the range of the plot appropriately. It does a pretty good job at that. But sometimes you might want to set the range explicitly. In Bokeh, there's this range 1D object. You give it a start point and an end point, and that defines a range. And so you can pass that into the plot when you create it, and that will define the range. So here, I say p.yRange equals range 1D. There's also a convenience on the figure method. You can also just pass in a tuple, start, end, just to make your life a little bit easier. So here I've done both things. X range equals 0 to 20, and I say Y range equals this actual range 1D object. And you can see that sure enough, the X range goes 0 to 20, and the Y range goes 0 to 15. And so if you need to have finer grained control over the data range of your plot, you certainly can do that. And this setting ranges is how you would do that. Titles, we already saw the title attribute. I think I set it to none on some of the previous examples, but here you can see I set it to some title, and sure enough, it sets here. But I can also set things like the text attributes, right? So remember, text color and text font style are 2 of the different text properties. And so oftentimes, if I want to set the text property for the title, it's going to be title underscore text color, or title underscore text font size. And so I set the color to be olive there, and the style to be italic, and it's kind of hard to see on the projector, but it is actually a nice olive color, and of course it's italic, as you can see. All of these properties, just to mention, are completely documented on our reference guide. So if you actually go to the reference guide, go over here. There we go. If you go to our reference guide, all of the different properties of all the different things are documented completely and sort of automatically here. So for instance, if we go to models.glyphs, we can see, here's all of our different glyphs, and they all actually have a nice example there. Here's what an annular wedge glyph looks like, and here's all the different properties, end angle, fill alpha, fill color. So you can always get, if you need to get down into it and see exactly what properties are available on any object, any plot object in Bokeh, all of that is auto-generated and always sort of up to date. If you're actually trying to do a language implementation of plot bindings for Bokeh, like if you want to make a Ruby binding for Bokeh, you can actually get a JSON prototype for what gets sent over to the client library as well if you really need that. So our reference docs are in quite good shape, and I would say for the next 0.9 release, our narrative documentation is going to see a big boost in quality as well. But just so you know, that's available if you need it. Okay, so that's, again, setting the title and the title color and the text style there. Why don't we go and take a break and let people play around with those couple of examples, and then we'll move down to changing some attributes on the axes and on the grids as well. If there's any questions that come up. Okay. Okay. One more question. Is it like a trellis plot? So you can almost certainly draw a trellis plot. There's nothing right now in Bokeh at a high level to generate, just say, give me a trellis plot. But that's exactly the sort of thing we want to put in Bokeh.charts. again, we've sort of been, experimenting for a little while with the interface in Bokeh.charts, and so we haven't gone crazy and created like 20 chart types because we didn't want to have to change them if we didn't like some of the interfaces. So we sort of finally settled on some of the things about the interface implementation, and they'll be, I think, very stable in the 0.9 release. And so we're going to start building a lot of new chart types on top of that, and so that's exactly the sort of thing we might want to add. You can absolutely draw a trellis. So yeah, so that's sort of a different question. You can absolutely draw a trellis plot. There's almost nothing you can't just draw, but some of it might be kind of tedious right now, right? There's nothing like at a high level that just says, give me a trellis chart, right? Yeah. Okay, good question. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at some of the other visual features of a plot that we might want to change. Axes, right? So again, by default, we get a nice linear scale axis, but we saw how we can ask for a log scale, date time, or categorical axis. But we want to be able to now set some of those attributes, those line color, right, or maybe the text font of the major label ticks or things like that. So of course, the first thing we have to do is get a hold of the object that we want to customize, right? We want to set some attributes on an axis. So the plot object actually exposes some nice convenient properties that we can use to do that. So there's things like p.x-axis, and that actually gives us back a list of all the x-axis objects. So you might have more than one, right? You might have one at the top or the bottom. You might actually have twin axis where you have two, multiple x-axes. So this gives you back a list. But it's actually a special kind of list that allows you to set attributes on it directly, and it'll affect all of the contents of the list. And so this is just as a convenience. So here I can say something like p.x-axis.axis label equals temperature. And that will set the axis label on every single x-axis there is to be temperature, right? So it's just a little bit of a convenience. We refer to that as being a splatable list. But yeah, so we can use this x-axis or y-axis or dot-axis attribute to get a hold of the axis objects, and we can now style them very easily. So here's some examples of that, right? So here I create a figure, I add a circle renderer to it. I want to set the axis label on the x-axis to temp. I want to set the line width for the axis to be 3 and the line color to be red. I want to set the y-axis axis label to be pressure, and I want to set the text color for the major labels on the y-axis to be orange, and I want to set the orientation for the text on the labels to be vertical. And then maybe I want to change all the axes, not just one or the other, but both the x and the y-axis. I want to change the number of pixels where the minor ticks enter the plot to be -3, and how far it goes out. And we can actually just take a look at the results, the easiest way to see it. We can see that sure enough, the x-axis is sort of thicker with width of 3. The vertical, the Y labels have been oriented vertically. We can see that the minor ticks there now sort of jut out of the plot 3 pixels from sort of 3 pixels to 6 pixels. They don't actually cross the axis anymore. So you have very fine-grained control over the visual appearance of bokeh plots, down to pretty much any visual aspect that you want. One of the things we want to do in the very near future is sort of make it easier to have sort of theme, aggregations of these style properties, sort of themes. If you did get a chance to see, or if you do go see the PyCon talk that Sarah Bird gave about bokeh, she made an amazing chart that was more like if you think of the things that are on like the New York Times, sort of the journalism and data journalism, those kind of really nice interactive graphics. It was very attractive and well styled. She's going to help us, with this as well, getting sort of nice, better themes put together and being able to make it theme more easily. So these sorts of things are coming down the pike, and will be here in the near future. But anyway, so that's an example of styling the axes. Same thing for grids, right? There's a .grid method on plots. It gives us all of the grids, the X and Y grids. They're splatable lists, so we can say something like p.grid line dash, and we can change the dashing for all of the grids. So here's another example in particular. I can change the grid line color to none. That actually makes the grid disappear. So here now the X grid is going to disappear. And the Y grid, I want to change the alpha to be 0.5, and I want to change the dashing. And sure enough, if I look on this, the X grid, the grid that intersects the X-axis, is gone because I said it's colored to none. And then the Y grid, it's got this nice alpha value. It's sort of been lightened up, and I've also applied a dashing to it. So again, I have very fine-grained control over the visual appearance of just about anything you might want to control in a plot. So let's go ahead and take this. I haven't executed any code in a notebook myself in a while, so maybe it's my turn to go ahead and play around with some code. Here we go. So here it is. So we could do things like, Y grid, Y grid, grid line color equals red. Make it. And sure enough, now we have red grid lines, right? So all of these things are completely controllable. And again, all of these attributes, if you really want to get down to it, you go to the reference guide. All of the attributes for all of the objects are listed there with the type of the property that they, the values that they accept. We'll get nice, error messages, right? If I set this to some, some gibberish that isn't understandable, I should get, that's interesting. So in the notebook, I'm not seeing some error messages that I'm expecting, but let's change this equal to, there we go. So I didn't like that, didn't validate that string very well, but here it gives me a nice error message saying I expected, a string or, a type of color, but I got this value 10, so I don't know what to do with it. So we do validate, we try to do a pretty thorough level of validation on all these plot properties, so that if you give it a type that's not expected, you'll find that out sooner rather than later. Instead of, finding out when you load the document and the plot's not there or the plot looks wrong, you'll get it at the Python level. Whenever you say, I want to show the plot, it tries to validate all these properties. So again, all those are available in the ref guide. So we'll change this back to navy. Navy is a color I like. There, we can see that there. What else can we change? If we go back to the gallery, trying to think if there's, this one doesn't really change things. So there's an old tutorial. If you go to the old tutorial, some of which I need to resurrect, there was some exercises about styling. So here again, we can sort of see an example of styling. Here I've changed lots of things like the background color, and I've changed both the X and the Y grid. I can not only have, vertical or horizontal orientations for the, the tick labels, I can actually, have sort of angular, I can specify an angle for the ticks. Again, very fine-grained control over the visual appearance. You can sort of get a lot of different visual styles if you want. Anyway, okay, let's see where we're at. So we have about a half an hour left. Questions, comments so far? Okay, we'll just keep on pressing forward. Maybe some words about plot tools as well. As I mentioned, there is a default set of tools that come with the Bokeh plots, but we can have fine-grained control over, whether we want additional tools added or if we want to remove some of those tools or if we need to configure some of those tools differently, we can do all of that. We also have control over the toolbar, right? So we can position the toolbar, above, below, left, or right of the plot. Here I've gone ahead and give the toolbar location equals below, and we can see on the plot that comes out, sure enough, the toolbar is below. So we can put that on the left or right, and that's fine. We can also say none. If you want no toolbar, you just say toolbar location equals none, and then you'll not get the toolbar at all. There's a lot of different tools we have. So the easiest way to specify the tools is to give one of these string names to the tools parameter of like figure or the chart functions. So here I've defined a list of tools, and I say box zoom and box select, crosshair, resize, reset, and I give it to the tools parameter right here. And that's the easiest way, right? So these really correspond to actual tool objects, and it's possible to actually put the tool objects in a list and pass that as the tools parameter too. But the easiest way, if possible, is just to use these sort of shortcuts. And so you can see there's things like a drag pan tool. There's X pan and Y pan, which will restrict the panning to just the X or Y dimension. If you, for instance, have a financial time series and you only want panning to work, on the X dimension, you can add X pan. Wheel zoom, same thing. You can restrict the zoom to just the X or Y dimension using X wheel zoom or Y wheel zoom. Save. We'll save a PNG of the plot. Just before anyone asks, I'll head it off. We're still working on the ability to save, for instance, SVGs and to do headless saving. It's actually a surprisingly technically challenging problem. There's a couple of different approaches, and none of them are very good, and none of them work so far. So we're still working on being able to do sort of headless plot generation, things like SVGs, but I'm hoping we'll have that in the next couple of months. Resize tool, that's the one that allows me to resize the plot. Tap and click allow us to do selections using mouse clicks or taps. By the way, all of this stuff works fine on your iPad. I should have brought my iPad with me, but you can load up Bokeh plots and you can pan around by dragging with your finger, or you can do a pinch operation and zoom. All this stuff works fine on touch. Should work fine on touch, so that's good. Crosshair allows a little crosshair to be centered on your cursor and follow you around. There's a lot of different selection tools like the box, polygon, lasso selection tools. And the hover tool. Reset tool is a button that allows you to reset the data bounds of the plot back to whatever they were when the plot was first drawn. So if you've been panning and zooming and you want to get back to where you started, you click the little reset tool button and that will reset the plot. So let's take maybe a look at that. So here's that example, right? So on the toolbar we can see I've got my box zoom that I've configured, the box select, my resize tool, my reset tool, and then I also can turn on or off my my crosshair. So this one, yeah, if I browser seems to have gone weird. Oh, box select. There we go. So this was the box zoom tool, so now I've zoomed in, but really I want to reset back to my original bound, so I can just hit the reset button. Broadly speaking, there's a few classes of tools. There's drag tools, things like the box selection, the lasso selection, the pan tools. There are wheel tools, like the wheel zoom tool. There's also passive sort of inspector tools, things like the crosshair or the hover inspector tool that can just sort of always be on. I'm not sure why that check mark's not checking, but anyway, this is sort of a passive inspector tool. And then buttons, sort of action buttons, and that's what the reset tool is. It's a button on the toolbar and not any other kind of visual thing. But yeah, so again, we have the ability to zoom. If I do a box zoom here, and then I can pan around. I don't have the pan tool. No wonder I can't. But I can reset. Box select here. When you notice, by default, when I select things, I get sort of a grayed out version of the unselected points. That's just, you have pretty fine-grained control over that too. If you want to specify what do selected versus unselected points look like, you can give the properties of those glyphs. But right now, there's sort of a standard default that just grays out things when they're unselected. And again, if you combine this with either the JavaScript actions that we just added, that's a bleeding edge feature. It's not in the last release, but it'll be in the next release. Or with the server, you can do things, right? When people make these selections, you can get access to the indices of the selected data, and then you can compute a regression line through the data and display that. Or you can update a histogram, or you can change something else, right? You have sort of unlimited possibilities for what you can do. You can respond to these interactions and make very rich visualizations. Okay. Excuse me. Throat's very dry today. Okay. Again, here's another example showing just one tool, right? So here we've created two tools, box select tool and the hover tool. So here, instead of using the strings as sort of a convenience, we've actually created a box select tool object and a hover tool object, and we've added those to our list of tools. And sure enough, we can see here's my box select, and I can select, and the other ones become unselected. But I also got a basic hover tool. The basic hover tool just shows you the index. You know which data point is this? This is the second data point. It also shows the data X and Y positions and the canvas X and Y positions, but you can configure the hover tool, both the visual appearance and also what data shows up, right? So if you obviously want to show different things, you can. We'll get to that down at the bottom. Let's go ahead and take a break there. People can play around with these examples, some of the tools examples. I'll play around a bit in the IPython notebook, but let me know if you have any questions. I'll come take a look. Go back to the gallery. Again, this periodic table is maybe a more interesting example of that hover tool, right? So here I've actually got a hover tool configured to show the name of the element, its atomic number, its type, atomic mass, CPK color, and electronic configurator. So lots of information there, sort of displayed in that hover tooltip. Example of that box plot I mentioned earlier, right? So this is a box plot, and I just basically give it my metals data, and it gives me a box plot out. Fairly simple data frame format. Just while we're waiting. Again, the matplotlib compatibility gives us some measure of Seaborn compatibility as well, right? So here's a nice Seaborn violin plot. Just a couple lines, right? Here's my violin plot, and I say to Bokeh, mpl.toBokeh, and all of a sudden it shows it. I think there was a question, what's a violin plot? This is kind of like a box plot, but it actually shows the distribution along this vertical axis, right? So this is the actual distribution of the data, sort of a representation of that distribution. So you can actually sort of see, if this were a bimodal distribution, you could actually see that, whereas a box plot might not give you that information. So that's just what a violin plot is. Okay. Okay. All right, questions about tools? Any problems, any issues people are having? Or just questions about tools in general? Okay, well, let's talk about some of the configuration you can do with tools. Hover tools might be one of the more complicated ones, but it's also one of the most useful ones. Basically, there's a little sort of simple language that describes various fields, right? So if you want to look into your data source for a column named, in this case, DES, I guess, for description or something. So if you select the 10th point and you want to get the description for the 10th point, it's that at DESK. So this is what shows up in the tooltip as like the left-hand side, in the title column. And then this is what we want the data to be. So we want the 10th, the ith description. If we click on if we hover over the the 10th point, we want to get the 10th description. If we want to hover over the 20th point, we want to get the description for the 20th point. There's a few special sort of known variables like $index and $x, $y that just correspond to like the X and Y position. And again, you can see that one here. So here, this gives you the description. In addition to that index and X and Y, it gives you that description, right? So the third row there is description, and whatever the corresponding description for each point is, that's what gets shown. And you can see up here, we haven't quite talked about yet, is that we've actually created explicitly one of the column data sources that the plots use. We've given it X and Y data. We've also given it this description column. And so the description column actually isn't visible anywhere. I mean, it doesn't get plotted in any way, but it is available to the hover tool. So the hover tool can inspect and do sort of a drill down on additional columns of data that might be present that you might want to show information about. And if we look at the actual, let's take a look at, too many tabs. We take a look at the periodic table. That's sort of a more sophisticated example. We can take a look at its hover tool configuration down at the bottom. And we can see that, yeah, so it's got, you know, whichever box I hover over, I want to print name and then show, you know, the corresponding name. I want to show the, you know, at atomic number, at type, at mass. A little bit something more sophisticated for the colors. We can also get the electronic column to get out the electronic configuration. So again, all of those show up in the tooltip for any particular item that I hover over. Okay. That's hover tool. So let's take a pause there, let people play around with the hover tool. Love to come take a look and help anyone use that. I'll come around for different questions, and then we'll move on from tools. Just 1 second. Okay, I didn't see any more raised hands. I did want to mention a couple of things because there are a few questions that come up throughout this, and it's maybe good to mention them. I meant to, but sometimes in the notebook, folks have seen the styling sort of go away, and the buttons turn very ugly, and sort of the CSS get really bad. That's been fixed in master. We had originally thought, oh, it'd be a really cool idea if when you import Bokeh, it just automatically tries to load the notebook, and you know, if we're not in the notebook, it fails, and if we're in the notebook, it succeeds, and that's great. And yeah, that sounds like a great idea, but because imports in Python are cached, if you execute the import twice in the notebook, it actually clears the output cell because there's nothing to output, and so it doesn't do the import. Imports are cached, and so that actually clears out the CSS that got loaded on the first import. So if you execute the import line twice in the notebook in the latest release, that's what causes the styling to go away. So my suggestion then is to put the imports in a single cell by themselves and to execute that only once. In the newer version, we don't try to do that. We only load the notebook CSS and JSS on that output notebook function, and we always do it unconditionally, and so that problem can't happen anymore. So if you've seen that issue, that's why. Sometimes you have a really good idea, and there are unintended little consequences. But okay. Also, some folks were able to resolve that image problem. It was a division problem. I mean, looking at it, I knew that was the problem, but I couldn't quite figure out why it was spelled differently. But if you do from future import division, if you're running Python 2, or if you rearrange the multiplication to put that floating point value first, then you'll always get a floating point value. That fixes the image problem. I tried to update it quickly on my machine right before the tutorial, and of course, I'm running Python 3, so I actually didn't see the problem. And so that's, again, apologies for that. But it is just a division problem, you know, Python 2, Python 3 division difference problem for that image one. Okay, any questions before we round out the last few sections here? Okay. Right quick, I want to mention this section's pretty thin. I didn't get to flesh it out as much. Oh, yeah, sorry. Didn't see.
How do you format the text on the X so you want like a comma separated thousands or dollars?
Oh, good. Very good question. You mean the ticks? Yeah. That's probably an area where we don't quite have as much ability to format as we'd like. Come talk to me after. Let me see exactly what your issue is, and there may be a solution currently, or that may be an issue we can add to look at. There are different kinds of axes types that you can add that give you a little bit finer grained control, but I'm not sure we have one that exposes. You know, I take it back. There is something called the tick. There's the tick formatter. So let's go find it. If we go to the model objects and we go to the top here, and we go to formatters. So there are some things you can tweak on the tick formatter. You can control, for instance, when or if it goes into scientific notation. And I think, you know what? On the date time, so for the date time ticker, you do actually have a pretty good control of the format. You can give this formats dictionary, and you can tell it all kinds of ways you want years or dates formatted. For things like currency, I'm not sure we have something exposed that would let you do that, but we could add something. So that's a great issue to add on the GitHub issue tracker. There is. Okay, so actually, I take it back. There is the new. I think. Okay, one of our devs, Mateos, I think, may have added this recently. The numeral tick formatter. So as you can see, Bokeh has grown into be quite a large library. It's hard sometimes, even for me, to keep all of it in my head. So there is this numeral tick formatter. So we'd have to play around with this. I don't, off the top of my head, I'm not sure that I've played around with this much. So we'd have to look at it. I think there's probably an example that uses it. But if you find me after the talk, we'll poke around. But it looks like it does allow you to get a bit more control over the format of what you want displayed on those axes. Yeah. So just in case you're curious, the way that the axes work is they're configured with a ticker, which says, okay, what are the nice numbers on this scale? So if you're on a log scale, it picks nice numbers on a log scale. If you're on a linear scale, it picks nice numbers on a linear scale. If you're on a date-time scale, it picks nice numbers across different date-time scales, right? Because nice numbers on a scale of like several months is different from what the nice values are at years. And so the ticker picks nice numbers appropriate for whatever scale you're at. And the tick formatter actually determines how things are formatted. Those tick labels are formatted. And so I had forgotten about the numeral tick formatter. That might be what you want. So we'll play around with that afterwards. Cool. Thank you for that question. Okay. Good. Okay. Quick digression here about multiple plots. I'm not going to go over this in too much detail, but just note that there is this V-plot thing, and there's similarly a grid plot and H-plot. If we want to have, for instance, several Bokeh plots arranged in a vertical fashion, we can put it in a V-plot and get lots of vertical plots. And we'll see that here again in a second. But I'm not going to dwell on that because I want to get to the next section, which is adding interactions, which is a little bit more interesting for you guys. So the first thing I want to talk about is linking. So there's different kinds of linkages you can express between plots and Bokeh. And it's actually, the conceptual model is quite simple. To have linkages between plots and Bokeh, you simply share things between them. If you want to have linked panning, where panning one plot causes another plot to pan, you simply share the ranges between the plots, and then automatically they're linked together. If you want to have linked selections, you can share the data source between the plots, and then all of a sudden the selection on one updates the selection on the other. And so let's take a look at what that looks like. Here for linked panning, again, I create my output file. Note, I have an error in my code here, by the way. I'm not sure why this worked for me in Python 3. Here in this list comprehension, it redefines x to be 10 at the end, and so the next line fails. So if you make this like 10 minus x2 for x2 and x, and abs x2 minus 5 for x2 and x, that'll work. I'm not sure why that worked on Python 3 and not Python 2. I wouldn't have expected that behavior to be different. But anyway, regardless of whatever, we create 3 columns of data, a list of x values, and then actually x0, y1, and y2. So we create 3 plots. We have some circles, triangles, and squares, and we can see all those here. We put them in a grid plot configuration. But what we've done that's different is we've shared the ranges, right? So here for the second plot, I say the x range is equal to the x range from the first plot, and the y range is equal to the y range from the first plot. And here on the third plot, I say, oh, only the x range is shared. I don't share the y range. And you can see exactly that. If I pan, or zoom this plot, the second plot pan and zooms in both directions, but that third plot only pans and zooms in that shared dimension, right? We shared the x-axis, so that's what gets shared. So again, very conceptually simple. If you want to have linked panning, you want to have the ranges linked, you share the ranges. It's very simple. Same thing for linked brushing, where if we have points that we want to select points on one plot, have inform the selection on another plot. In this case, again, we create one of these column data sources where we actually explicitly say, I want an X column with that data and a Y0 column and a Y1 column. That's right here. And then I pass that to my glyphs. So I pass the source to my circle, and I pass it to my other circle. And sure enough, I have 2 plots, and that's great. They have my data. If I go ahead and get my box select tool and I select this half here, sure enough, right, the selection shows up mirrored. Whatever indices of points were selected on this plot show up on the other one, and vice versa. So it's very easy to have that kind of linked selection. And this can be in a static plot. This is an HTML file that you can email to someone, right? This doesn't require the Bokeh server or anything like that. If you want to do more sophisticated kinds of linkages, like for instance, if the data sources if you want to do linkages between plots that have different data sources, you can. You either have to use one of our JavaScript actions that we just added, it's going in the next release, or use the Bokeh server, because you have to have the logic that, sort of translates from one to the other somewhere. But this, in this case, where you have a shared data source, it's extremely simple to share the selection and have this linked selection behavior in this capability. Okay, So I'll give you guys just a few minutes to play around with this one. We'll have a few more actions we can play around with and see before we're done, but we have about 15 minutes. So go ahead and play around with these two examples, and then let me know if you have any problems or questions, and we'll finish up with the open URL and the JS action, and that'll be a pretty good place to stop. So, question? All righty. Folks had a chance to play around with the linked panning, linked selection examples. Any questions or comments about those? All right, well, the last two sections here are on what we call actions. This is a fairly new concept that we've added to Bokeh. The first one actually will work fine for you. The last one is not going to work unless you have that dev build. It's sort of bleeding edge new stuff, but I do want to show it to you because it's really cool. And it's going to be in the next release, which again is going to be in about 3 weeks, 0.9 release in about 3 weeks. But the first one is this open URL action. So the problem or the use case we had was, we want to be able to let people click on glyphs and open a URL or something to happen, right? Maybe we hide or show something in the plot. We want to be able to write these actions in Python and put them in static plots that we generate. And by static plot, I just mean that there's no Bokeh server. I mean, it might have tools and widgets, but it's a single HTML file that has everything self-contained. That's what I mean by static. And so the question is, what can we do? And so we had this sort of notion of an action. And the first action we added was this open URL action. And it's basically very simple here. I create a tap tool. And then I say I want to configure the tap tool action with this open URL object, which is configured with this URL. And you notice that, again, it has the same hover tool type syntax here where it says, at color. And so sure enough, it says click the dots. If I click on the green one, that's actually going to open up a URL that takes me to, commutercreative.com/olive. I'm not sure why it's not loading here on the network. It wasn't loading for me earlier either. Something about this particular website is loading very slowly. But you can see that it did, in fact, navigate there, regardless of our current network configuration. Up there it went. Not sure why that took so long. If I go to, the other one, the one here that's, Firebrick, then sure enough, I click on that one, it opens up the Firebrick. So this allows you to tie, tap type events or click type events to, to opening URLs. And so this is something a lot of people have asked for. So we sort of started there. It's very sort of simple to spell and simple to implement. So that's really cool. But of course, that's, never to be satisfied with the immediate thing. We said, what else can we do to make it simpler to have more sophisticated or more rich kind of interactions possible in static documents? Because although the server is fantastic, I mean, it's amazing for, like, again, if you have large data you want to downsample or streaming data or intensive computations you want to be able to power through, full back and forth, communication, it's great for those things. But it is a server you have to deploy. So if you just want to have some simple thing with a slider, you shouldn't need necessarily a server to do that. And so, someday I would love to be able to have Python that gets compiled to JavaScript. For now, we just done the simplest thing we could do, which is just to say, well, if you want to add your own JavaScript callback, you can do that. And so we just exposed this capability. And so it allows us to have, this actually opens up quite a lot of things, right? So in particular here, I plot a line. I create a column data source. I create some data, which is, I think, where is my data? It's just a line, right? So it's just a straight line. And then I plot the line X and Y from my source. You can see the line right here. It's width 3. It's got an alpha. That's great. And then I give it this callback. I give the callback to the slider. So slider is one of our widgets. We didn't really have enough time to really get into this, but Bokeh has its own sort of widget set that you can add. So I create a widget that says starts at -2, ends at 2. It starts, the actual initial value is 1. The step is 0.1. It has this title, and more importantly, I can give it a callback. And the callback is this callback object here, which takes a little snippet of JS code. And what does it do? Well, it gets out the X and Y data, and then it loops over it, and it multiplies the slider value times the X value, right? And so sure enough, if I put all of those in this V form, and then I've got my slider up here, I can move the slider and see the line update, right? Because the way Bokeh is architected, again, is that if the data source changes, the plot will automatically notice that and say, oh, I need to redraw myself. And so it's very straightforward to have this kind of interaction. So this is a very simple example, but you could imagine things that are a lot more sophisticated than this, like you're combining this with tap tools, where your action is if you click on some glyph, it actually opens up and shows some drill down data in one case, and if you click on a different glyph, that goes away, and some other set of drill down data shows up. It's all kinds of different possibilities here. And so this does get into the realm of having to write a little bit of JavaScript, which is, again, someday I hope to, we got a lot of compiler folks that continue, and we have the folks who wrote Numba and work on LLVM Lite, and I'm going to try to tug on their ears someday and get them to write a sort of or help utilize or leverage one of the existing Python sort of JS compilers, so maybe we can actually write callbacks in pure Python. But for now, this is still, I think, a nice capability. Again, if you're running on the latest release 0.8.2, this is newer than that. This is sort of bleeding edge stuff. If you download the, if you install the dev build, I think this is part of the dev build, and you should be able to play around with it. But this one should work for you, regardless of what release 082 or the dev build should work. So I'll let you guys play around with this for a few minutes. We'll take a couple of questions, and then, in fact, why don't we just go ahead and take questions while people work, because we only have about 5 minutes. So yeah, let's just open it up to questions, comments. Yeah, in the back. Yeah. So the question is about what do we have in terms of visualizations for networks, for graphs. The answer is sort of the same thing I gave over there about trellis graphs, which is you absolutely can draw whatever graph visualization you want. What we don't have, either at a high level or in the client library, is anything that can sort of do the layout for you, right? So that's what we don't have. And we would like to add that. That's a great feature. It's just that's a chunk of work, and there's only so many of us. And I'd love to have someone interested come scratch that itch, you know, and do that. Or if not, we'll hopefully be able to get to it this year. But so yeah, so absolutely you can draw whatever network structure you want using the primitives of Bokeh. But there's nothing at a high level that will do that for you. And there's nothing that will sort of do a layout like a force-directed or other kind of layout for you yet. But there is an open issue for it. It is a feature we'd like to have. It's just, it's on our list. We've got a big to-do list, you know. Yeah, you would have to do the layout yourself. There's nothing that, so if you have something that, you know, can sort of generate a layout for you, you could take that output and probably use that pretty easily with Bokeh. So it's just, we don't have anything in Bokeh or a dependency of Bokeh that would use something like that to automatically generate the layout for you. Yeah. Cool. A question? No, so yeah, so this is built on Canvas. A couple of different reasons we chose Canvas. One is that so the other primary originator of Bokeh, my boss, the co-founder of Continuum, Peter Wang, he worked on the Choco library. I worked on it with him. We're both familiar with this kind of interface. I've also done a lot of Cairo work, and so it's very similar to the Canvas type stuff. And so it was easy for us to get up and running with a library built on Canvas. It's also a bit more performant. I mean, one of the things about D3 is that it sort of creates a DOM element for everything you want to draw on. So if you want to draw 10,000 or 20,000 points, you can try that with D3. You're probably not going to have a great day. You can certainly put up 20,000 points on a Bokeh plot. The interactivity may go down at some point, but you can certainly draw 20,000 points in a fraction of a second on Canvas. WebGL, we hope to push that even further. Now, I mentioned we are interested in the case for sort of big data, and we've done some preliminary work. We had an academic collaborator as part of our DARPA X-Data funding for Bokeh. And we worked on this technique called abstract rendering, which is sort of a pre-rasterization technique for sort of downsampling data in a very intelligent way. And we've sort of built out some capability, but we're taking a step back and trying to reevaluate how we've done that and make it more easy for other users to use. And so that's a capability we're absolutely interested in, and that's something that the server will be a big part of. But that's not developed to a high level yet. It's there if you want to play with it, and I'm happy to help anyone sort of play with what we've got. But that's sort of the even next level, you know, the millions, tens of millions, you know, hundreds of millions of points kind of case where you want to be able to do downsampling on the server. So just naive downsampling on the server is something you can do already. I don't have it up and running. There's an example I've shown at previous talks where, for instance, there was, I think, 2.1 million, you know, point time series. There were like 3 of them in a row, and you can zoom in and out and get this progressive refinement. And it's going to the server and saying, here's my data bounds. Give me a subsample of the data that's appropriate for this pixel density, right? So then that's what you really want to compare. If you say, I've got, you know, 500 pixels across, there's no point in trying to show, you know, 10,000 points. I want to do some kind of downsampling that's appropriate. So we have a lot of interesting ideas going forward in the future. It's just a matter of, you know, again, big to-do list, but good question. Other questions? Maybe just one more? Now that I've asked for one more, I have to get one more. Okay. Oh, there we go. Oh, yeah. No, so that's actually part of Bokeh. It's called the cross filter. It's called the cross filter app. That we have some work's been done on that to develop it. There's actually a couple of outside contributors who've been really interested in that and have actually made it quite a bit better in recent weeks. And so we want to, you know, keep moving that even forward. But it's something you can run. Right now, it doesn't work very well in the IPython notebook. But if you just want to say have a cross filter on some data frame, you can put it on a web page and it should work fine. So, yeah, great. All right. Well, I think probably got to make time for the next speaker. I don't know how closely those talks are spaced. So we'll make time for the next speaker to get up here if they need it. But I want to thank everyone for coming and listening to the tutorial and the talk. Apologize for the few version sort of glitches we had there because of my tardy creation of the materials. But hopefully it was still very enlightening. And again, if you have any questions, please come to the mailing list. Please come to, you know, people ask questions on Stack Overflow. We try to monitor. GitHub issues, of course, are a great way to communicate. And if you're interested in getting involved or participating either in creating documentation or examples or working on the core library, we could use all the help we can get. So certainly, feel free to engage with us. But all right, well, thank you very much.